Okay, so this video is about simplifying large fractions. I have another video out that talks about the basic process of simplifying fractions, making them use as small as numbers possible. So if you're looking for information on simplifying some smaller fractions like 2/4 or 5/10, something that uses relatively small numbers, then you should look at that video. This one is specifically for people who are asking about what do I do when I get these big numbers and I don't know how to figure out what to simplify by. So how do I know which number to divide by? I'm going to give you one example of a small problem, a very simple problem. If we have a problem like 9/12, hopefully when you look at that, you think to yourself, well, I know that 9 and 12 have a common factor of 3, meaning that you can divide both of those numbers by 3. You have to find some number that you can divide both the numerator and the denominator by evenly. And that's exactly how you reduce a fraction to lowest terms or simplify the fraction. So in this case, I look at it and knowing my multiplication facts, I know 3, 6, 9, 12. I know that 9 and 12 are both products of 3, that they're both multiples of 3. So if I divide by 3 on the top and also 3 on the bottom, then I can simplify this fraction. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. The reason that you use 3/3, and I used to draw a 1 around this, a big 1 like this, because 3/3 is really equal to the whole number 1. Any fraction that has the same numerator and denominator is equal to 1. If you have this sort of badly drawn rectangle, and you have 2 halves, we'll pretend like they're equal, and that's one whole rectangle. Take the rectangle, 2 halves, or you split it into 4/4, that's the same fraction. Okay? Anytime you have the same numerator or denominator, you have the same fraction. This 1 helps out some people to understand that that's equal to 1, and it seems to confuse some people. So don't worry about it. If it confuses you, just ignore it. But what you're doing, you're dividing by the same number on the top and the bottom. Because we're dividing this by a fraction that's equal to 1, we're not changing the value of the fraction at all. 9/12 and 3/4 have the same value. They just look different. Okay, that's the only thing that we're doing here. So my first rule of divisibility, the only way that I can really teach you how to know what to divide by is by teaching you some of the divisibility rules. And some of them are really common sense rules. Like, for example, the very first rule I chose to show you is tens. Numbers divisible by 10 if the last digit is 0. And I know that you know that, because if you look at a number like 50, you know that it's 5 times 10. Okay? And hopefully if you look at a number like 220, you also know that that's a multiple of 10. Because when you multiply 5 times 10 to get the number 50, you're just really adding a 0 to the 5, right? And when you add that 0, what you do is you move the 5 into the tens place. Okay? By adding, this is 5 ones. By adding the 0 in the ones place, multiplied by 10, we add that 0. That's actually moving your 5 into the tens place. And that's what you're doing when you multiply by 10, when you use the shortcut of adding the 0. So anytime you see a 0 on the end, so this one is going to be 22 times 10. Anytime I see a 0 on the end of a number, it is easy to figure out what the factors are because I just take the 0 off. Okay? So let's look at some fractions that are going to be divisible by 10. If I take that 50 again and I put it over the 220 that we had there, I can take that and I can say divide by 10. 50 divided by 10 is 5. And remember, I just take the 0 off. 22 divided by 10, or 220 divided by 10 is 22. You can really shortcut the whole thing. If you ever see a numerator and denominator with a 0 on the end, you can literally just cancel them out. That's the shortcut, and it leaves you with a simplified fraction. Now, in this case, this is the 5/22 is the fraction simplified all the way down. Sometimes you're going to have to do more than one step, but we'll get to that later. So if you look at the fraction, it has 0 on the numerator and the denominator, then use 10. That's going to work best for you to start out with anyway. So the next rule I want to show you is the next easiest. If a number is divisible by 5, that means you see the last digit is a 0 or a 5. So if you see a 0 or a 5 at the end of a number, it is divisible by 5. Okay, of course, we already know the zeros are divisible by 10, but you might get something like this. Now, the numerator has a 5 at the end, and the denominator has a 0 at the end. But 5 and 0, we know it's divisible by 5. So you're going to divide by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. You're just thinking, right, 5 times what is 15? So 5 times what is 50? 10. 50 divided by 5 is 10. So that one is 3/10. Look for the 5 and the 0 on the end. Use the number 5. Next one is 2's. 2's also are really easy because 2's are even numbers. And an even number is 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And actually 0 by itself is not even. It's a different kind of number. But if a number ends in 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8, it's even. If you think about counting by 2's, most of the time if I told you to count by 2's, you would probably say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, because we think of the even numbers. Even though if you wanted to count by odd numbers, you could. The first even number is 2. Even numbers, you can cut them evenly in half. So 2, if I cut it in half, it's 2 1's. 4, if I cut it in half, it's two 2's. If I take a 3, I can't do that. It's 1 1/2. If I cut it in half. So it's going to make an even number that way. So if you see a 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 at the end of any number, no matter how big it is, you can divide it by 2. Now sometimes you're going to have to divide it by 2 more than once. Sometimes you're going to have to divide it by another number. But you know if it's even, 2 is your default. 2 is something you can always fall back to. So if you get a big number like this, you look at that fraction and you go, I don't even know where to start. Well, you can start with 2. Now, it may not be the best choice. 4 or 6 or 8 may be a better choice. But in this case, if I don't know where to start, but I see that there's a 4 at the end and there's a 6 at the end, and that means that both of those are even numbers, I'm going to start with 2 because at least that cuts my big number in half. It makes it half as big. Even if I have to do it again, even if I have to use 2 again, I can at least start this way. Now before this, I've done all of it in my head. But now I've got such a big fraction that I'm actually going to write a little division problem. I'm going to use a standard division algorithm, and I'm going to say 124 divided by 2. And an algorithm is just the standard way that we see division. We're starting to see division in a lot of different ways with Common Core standards coming in. So you may do division in an entirely different way. But whatever way you do division, do a little division problem. So in this case, I'm just going to say 2 goes into 1, does not go into 1. 2 goes into 12 6 times. 2 times 6 is 12. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to bring down my 4. And then I'm going to say 2 goes into 4 twice. So 124 divided by 2 is, let me use a different color here so we can see it a little better, is 62. I'll do another little division problem over here. 286 divided by 2. 2 into 2 one time. Subtract. The 8 comes down. 2 into 8 4 times. Subtract. The 6 comes down. 2 into 6 3 times. So now I have 143 on the bottom. Now we haven't gone through all of our rules yet. So what I do know is that I can't make 62 143rds. I can't make that any smaller by dividing by 2 because I have an even number here and an odd number here. 143 cannot be divided by 2 evenly. So I might have to go through some of my other division rules. I know I can't divide it by 10 because it doesn't end in zeros. I know I can't divide it by 5 because it doesn't end in 5 or 0. So I might have to look at some of my other rules. But because it isn't divisible by 2, it is not divisible by 4, 6, or 8. It's not divisible by any even number. Because if it's divisible by any other even number, it also has to be divisible by 2. So when you see an odd number, you don't have to worry about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. It's not divisible by any of those numbers if it's an odd number. Odd numbers, you just have to worry about odd numbered divisors. You have to worry about 3, 5, 7. And if you've worried about 3 already, you don't have to worry about 9. Okay, so that's the even numbers divisible by 2. Divisible by 3 is a little trickier. It's not one that I remember all the time. Sometimes I have to look it up. But a number is divisible by 3 if the sum of the digits is divisible. So if I write this number, if I write 5, 2, and another 2, 522, just the whole number. If I look at that number, 3 is not the first number that pops in my head. I think, well, it's an even number. I know I can divide it by 2, maybe 4 or 6, but I don't think about 3. What I can do, I can prove to you that I can divide this by 3. I take this 5 and add it to the 2. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus another 2. Okay, adding all 3 of these together. 7 and 2 equal 9. So my theory says that 522 should be evenly divisible by 3. And let's check it out. 522, 3 goes into 5 one time. I'm going to subtract, bring my other 2 down. 3 goes into 22 7 times. Subtract, bring down the 2. 3 goes into 12 4 times. It does work. It sounds crazy, but it does work. So if you add up the digits, like I did here, and you divide them, but they equal a number that's divisible by 3. Here the number's 9. 3 times 3 is 9. So it's divisible by 3. Then I know I can divide that number by 3. So when you have a fraction that is something like 126, and the bottom number could be 303. Now I'm going to add those up. I'm going to think to myself, 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 6 is 9. And then I'm going to say 3 plus 0 is 3, plus 3 is 6. 6 and 9 are both divisible by 3. So I'm going to try to take this fraction and divide it by 3. And again, I'm going to do these quickly. I'm going to have to do a little division problem. 3 into 12 4 times. 3 into 6 2 times. So 126 divided by 3 is 42. And then 303. 3 into 3 one time. Bring down the 0. 3 into 0 0 times. And 3 into 3 one time. Now I'm going to look at that really quickly. doesn't have 2 zeros at the end, so it can't be divisible by 10. It doesn't have 2 5s, or a 5 and a 0. It doesn't have 2 even numbers. 101 is not an even number. So I'll look at the last rule I've used so far. 4 plus 2 is 6. That could be divisible by 3. But 1 plus 0 plus 1 is 2. That's not divisible by 3. So far, I think that this might be lowest terms because I don't know any other rules that would take away from that. Now I'm going to show you another rule. I'm going to show you the rule for sevens. I'll let you read that rule. I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. So you can use 7 if you double the last digit, subtract from the number, and you get an answer that's divisible by 0, or that's 0 or divisible by 7. I'm going to tell you the truth. I never use this rule. I'm not even going to go into it. I might do a whole extra little podcast on it sometime, or a little video on it sometime. But the 7 rule, it takes me so long to go through the steps for this rule that it isn't really very helpful for me. So 7, if I go through my rules for 10s and 5s and 2s and 3s and I don't see any of those working, 7 really is the only one that's left. Because if you can divide something by 3, you don't have to worry about the 9. You can just divide it by 3 again. You don't have to worry about it. You could do it twice. And I'll try to show you one of those. But I'm not worried about the other things. I'm worried about the 10s, the 5s, the 2s, the 3s, and this 7. If you see something that doesn't fit any other rule, you might have to just give 7 a try. Because 7 has some weird combinations, weird multiples that you wouldn't think are divisible by 7, and yet they are. So that's kind of your last resort one. If you want to learn this rule and use it, you're welcome to do that. But for me, it's more than I can keep in my head. And if I have to go back and look at the rule over and over, it takes me less time to just do a little division problem by 7 than it does to look at this and try to figure it out. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you today is sometimes when you're working with big fractions, you end up having to simplify more than once. At least I do, because I don't start out with the biggest number I could start out with. And the purpose of this video is to show you how to work your way through the problems. It takes a little while. This video has been longer than I expected it to be. We're almost at 20 minutes now. It's probably too long, but I wanted to make sure that I got all the parts in. So if I take a big number like 126, 190 seconds, I'm going to think about my rules. First rule is, the easiest rule is 10s. Got a 6 and a 2 at the end, 10 won't work. Got a 6 and a 2 at the end, 5 won't work either because it has to be 0 or 5. If I go to my 2s, now I have a number that'll work because 126 ending in a 6 is an even number, and 192 ending in a 2 is an even number. So I'm going to really quickly do my division. 126. I put 2 into it. 2 into 12, 6 times, and 2 into 6, 3 times. So 63. And 192. Do my quick division. Gives me 96. Now, those are still really big numbers. I'm going to look at them again. I'm going to go through my rules again. I already know 10 and 5 are out. I divided by 2. Can I divide by 2 again? 3, nope. 3 is not an even number. 3 is an odd number. That won't work. But maybe I can divide it by 3. I haven't tried 3 yet. So 6 and 3, because we have to add the digits to see if it'll be divisible by 3. 6 plus 3 is 9. And 9 plus 6 is 15. Well, 15 and 9 are both divisible by 3. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 5 is 15. So I'm going to use 3. I know I can divide both of these numbers by 3. Start with 63. 3 goes into 6 2 times. And 3 goes into 3 1 time. So I have 21 over here. 96 divided by 3. 3 goes into 9 3 times. And 3 goes into 6 2 times. 21, 30 seconds. Can't divide it by 10, by 5. Can't divide it by 2 because it's not even. I'll check for 3 again. 2 plus 1 is 3. That's divisible by 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. Can't do it. The only other option I would be worried about is 7. Well, 3 times 7 is 21, but 7 times 4 is 28. That won't work. 7 times 5 is 35. That won't work. I think this is lowest terms. It takes time to work through the big fractions. But you have to have some place to start. And if you can learn even a few of your divisibility rules, just think about those zeros and 5s on the end. Think about whether it's an even number. And the 3 rule's pretty easy. Add the digits. You should get a pretty small number. It should be a multiple of 3 that's a pretty small number. Even if you're using a large number and adding the digits together, you can tell if it's divisible by 3 if both of those numbers add up to numbers that are divisible by 3. I hope this helped. I'm sorry the video was so long. Hopefully it helps you with the larger fractions.